Hi, I'm Jim Spina. Thanks for sharing this moment with me. I want to talk to you about really an event that occurred in my life, and it was a wonderful thing. The setting, it's 1974. It's on Lake Erie, outside of Buffalo, New York. And I'm in a wedding. And it was a beautiful wedding. In fact, my father, who's a professional saxophone player, has his own band, and his band played at this wedding, and it was my sister's wedding. That was the wedding I was allowed to have my first alcoholic beverage at. I was 13 years old. And I really didn't want to be at the wedding. I was a shy, introverted kid. I I like to read books. I read the encyclopedia. I'm a nuclear physicist. I love science. But I went because it was my sister's wedding and because my father made me. Um, but I was told we could have one alcoholic drink. I used to like a soda called Squirt. It was a grapefruit soda. So my mother suggested, well, why don't you have a vodka and grapefruit? You can have one. And so I did. And I was sitting back and I had a sip. My first thought was the vodka kind of ruins the grapefruit. And then the second sip, something incredibly powerful happened. My life changed in ways that it's extremely difficult for me to articulate, but I'm going to try. Alcohol opened up my mind. I saw people in a different light. I saw myself in a different light than I've ever seen myself before. Real people, living people, breathing people, people I could touch. I was unafraid. I had no fear of interaction, and I interacted with so many people. I can remember every single thing about that night from then forward. I remember that drink. I can still hear the tinkle of crystal glasses as they're toasted at the wedding. I can smell different perfumes that the woman had wearing. I remember what I ate. I remember what I wore. I remember a lot of the clothes that other people wore. I can remember looking out the window and seeing the sunset on Lake Erie. I can still see it when I close my eyes. Mostly, I remember the magnificence of the feeling. Here's the hard part to tell you, and I'm going to say it. It's difficult to articulate when somebody experiences an elevated state of consciousness. And that's what happened to me. I was in love. I was in love with the stranger. I invited alcohol into my body, mind, body, soul, and spirit, wholeheartedly. Nobody had ever done for me, ever, in my life, up to the age of 13 years old, what alcohol did for me, and virtually instantaneously. I've heard people talk about it burns going down their throat. It burnt a little bit, but it was a wonderful, warm burn. I could feel it sliding down my throat and into my stomach, and it was warm, and it seemed to expand my capillaries and go into my bloodstream, and I could feel it as it pushed down towards my toes and my fingers and my face. It lit me up. That fucking drink was alive. It wasn't a noun. It wasn't a thing. It was alive. And it brought me to life. And no matter what happened to me in my 42 years of chronic, severe, and fatal alcoholism, always the stranger would bring me back to that moment. And always, the only thing I could remember is how he made me feel. Not what he'd done to me. Not how I bled to death. Not how I had cirrhosis. Not how I was flown by shock trauma helicopter to a shock trauma center. I didn't remember any of that. But thousands of times I remembered how it made me feel. And that is what always made me reach for another drink. Quitting's not hard. I quit 1,000 times. The problem is, when you fall in love with a person, you establish a relationship, a bond that can't be broken. And I was in love with the stranger. I was more in love with the stranger than any relationship in my life, bar none, including my relationship with God. I've always believed in God, a universal power, but I never walked 11 miles in the snow to go to church. I did to get alcohol. I loved my wife greatly. But if it came between doing an event with my wife and spending quality time with her, or spending quality time with a stranger, and being welcomed into a world where inferiority doesn't exist, judgment of me doesn't exist, where only a heightened sense of perception exists. What happened to me was when I drank alcohol, it changed my perception of the world, my circumstances, people, and myself. And when your perception changes that profoundly, it changes your perspective on life. And if you change your perspective on any given event, it changes how you experience that event. And if you change how you experience the events that are happening around you, you've changed your life. The stranger changed my life. Eventually, the stranger murdered me. That's another story. Thanks for listening. I'm glad you shared this time with me.